Una vez conferido el grado de doctor, se concede la palabra al doctor don Michel R. Denis para que pronuncie su discurso de ingreso en este claustro.
Señor rector magnífico de la Universidad de La Laguna, ilustrísimos miembros del Consejo de Gobierno, ilustrísimos decanos y autoridades, distinguidos miembros del claustro de la Universidad de La Laguna, distinguidos profesores y colegas de la universidad, distinguidos profesores y colegas de otras universidades que asisten a esta ceremonia, profesor Corriente, señoras y señores. Todos los asistentes a este claustro entenderán que el evento de hoy tiene un valor excepcional para mí al proporcionarme la espléndida oportunidad de convertirme en miembro de la Universidad de La Laguna. Soy plenamente consciente del honor y del prestigio que supone el incorporarme a la comunidad académica que ustedes representan, sancionando así mis 25 años de colaboración con la Facultad de Psicología. Deseo expresar no solo mi orgullo, sino también mi emoción y más aún mi profunda gratitud a esta asamblea académica que el pasado año decidió conferirme el título de doctor honoris causa de la ULL. Quiero manifestar mi más cálido y sincero agradecimiento por la decisión de aceptarme como un nuevo colega entre ustedes. Queridos colegas, seguramente habrán notado que, pese a mis esfuerzos, no hablo con fluidez el castellano, aunque espero no haber maltratado demasiado su lengua al pronunciar estas breves palabras introductorias. Solicito, no obstante, su permiso para proseguir mi discurso en la que hoy en día es considerada la lengua internacional, tanto en la academia como en otras áreas de la actividad humana. Aunque he sido un asiduo visitante de Tenerife durante tantos años, lamento no haber aprendido más que unas cuantas frases convencionales en castellano. Solicito, pues, su indulgencia para continuar hablando en la lengua internacional. First of all, I want to thank you, Professor Manuel de Vega, for your very kind words of introduction. Your laudatio is full of generous statements which speak warmly to me and remind me of the many rewarding milestones of our collaboration. Although several of those gathered here already know how my collaboration with your university began, I would like to briefly retrace the main steps of how I first came to La Laguna and the subsequent joint venture between La Laguna and myself. The story began in the mid-80s. In 1985, an international conference was held in Europe as an initiative of the International Imagery Association. For about 15 years, under the leadership of two prominent North American scholars, Alan Pavio and Stephen Koslin, cognitive psychology had poured tremendous effort into granting full recognition to mental images as functional components of higher mental processes. The research programs of Pavio and Koslin contributed both to demonstrating the impact of mental imagery on learning, problem solving, language comprehension, and so on, but also to accounting for the intrinsic properties of mental images to explain their functional role in cognition. At that time, imagery research was at a turning point and competing interpretations of its underlying mechanisms were emerging. This 1985 conference, which was held in Swansea, UK, marked a time when several European scientists dedicated to the study of human cognition realized that there was a true critical mass of researchers active in Europe, complementary to the huge development of North American research in this domain. This was the motivation for the launch of the European Workshop on Imagery and Cognition, EWIC, in 1986 in Orsay, France. The workshop proved very successful, and since this first meeting, it has been organized in Europe regularly every 2 years. At that time, I ensured that the contributions to EWIC drew from a set of countries well known for their dedication to the study of mental imagery, namely France, UK, Germany, Spain, and Italy, while making sure that their approach was connected to broader concerns and topics such as visual spatial imagery, visual spatial memory, memory for actions, spatial cognition, mental models, language, hence the explicit reference to imagery and cognition. It is in this context that I became aware of the work conducted in La Laguna by Manuel de Vega and Maria José Rodrigo on mental rotation at that time, the building of mental models based on spatial descriptions, and the subtle relationships between gesture and language in the processing of directional information. Both Manuel and Maria José participated in the early editions of EWIC. Not surprisingly, La Laguna became eventually one of the first venues of this conference in 1992, bringing not only dozens of European scholars in Tenerife, but also leading figures from the other side of the Atlantic, such as Mark Marchak, Peggy Intons-Peterson, and Phil Johnson-Laird. Let me add that if Helsinki was the most northerly European location of EWIC in its almost 30 years of life, then La Laguna can claim to be the workshop's most southerly academic venue, European academic venue. That said, it seems that very unlikely that EWIC would go much further south in the future, although it went recently very far east in the island of Cyprus, thanks to my friend and colleague Marios Avramides here present. Now, the involvement of La Laguna under the leadership of Manuel de Vega was essential to the development of European collaboration in the area of mental imagery and mental models, and essential to the French team I then headed in an interdisciplinary lab funded by the French National Center for Scientific Research, CNRS, on the Orsay campus of the University of Paris Sud. Manuel and I succeeded in obtaining several joint grants in the framework of the so-called Franco-Spanish Integrated Actions, the PICASO program, supported by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Spanish Ministry of Education of Science. A further significant landmark in this joint venture was the much larger grant we obtained from the European Union under the Human Capital and Mobility Program, which provided still more opportunities for interaction between Orsay and La Laguna, and also the universities of Aberdeen, Padova, and Saarbrücken. A set of joint international publications involving our teams bears witness to the productivity of this collaboration. The dedication of both our teams to this collaborative enterprise was much facilitated by the ready welcome shown to me by the ULL during my annual research visits. These have continued since 1990, which means that this year marks a collaboration of 25 years, a silver jubilee. And during this time, it was also a great honor to be invited by Manuel de Vega, editor of the Spanish journal Cognitiva, to join the editorial board for the years 1992 to 99. During this collaboration, my vision of psychology science evolved. The progress of my work was facilitated by the numerous opportunities I had for interaction and discussion, which allowed new ideas to emerge and consolidate. After conducting a research program on the nature and functions of mental images, and such as those that depend on visual experience, I became interested in situations where people are invited to build visual images based on the processing of purely verbal information. The challenge was to collect evidence, if any, that visual images constructed from language exhibit structural and functional properties similar to those of perceptually based images. This is what my colleagues and I in Orsay managed in a series of experiments that also marked the starting point of my interest for the mental representation of space. More specifically, I dedicated my research to the role of language in spatial cognition and the possibility of communicating spatial knowledge in the form of linguistic messages. The results of this research program gave support to the view that despite their distinct properties, imagery and language can cooperate in contributing to the establishment of spatial knowledge. From an applied perspective, this program also inspired further work, preparing the ground for the design of computer-based systems to assist human navigation. Our research included the use of virtual reality to study the cognitive processes responsible for the construction of spatial knowledge. In particular, we developed a project intended to provide three-dimensional immersive audio environments for the blind people. Lastly, a long-term collaboration with neuroimaging specialists gave us the opportunity of collecting more detailed knowledge about the brain architecture involved in the processing of image, language, and spatial information. These years were indeed those where psychology developed closer and stronger relationships with cognitive neuroscience, as was the case in our CNRS lab, as well as the Neurocog Institute on the Guadalajara campus. Again, all of this progress in my own research developed in connection with the invaluable exchanges I enjoyed with colleagues from abroad, in particular those of La Laguna. I was also very interested to see that the topics explored by Manuel touched new areas, in particular the increasing popular area known as embodied cognition. Manuel came to France several times to report on his research in this area. The last time was in 2013 when he participated in an international symposium that we organized in Lille under the auspices of the French Academy of Sciences. So 25 years, this is a substantial amount of time for encounters, discoveries, and even surprises. This ceremony provides me with a delightful occasion of reviewing them and sharing with you the pleasure I have experienced during my visits. Let me first recall my interactions with the university, then with the island of Tenerife, and finally relate a very special further reason for me to be a steadfast visitor of both. First of all, let me tell you about my discovery of your university. When I visited La Laguna for the first time in 1990, the Guadalajara campus had not yet been established, and initial meetings with my colleagues took place on this campus. I had the opportunity of witnessing the development of the new campus and soon became familiar with the Faculty of Psychology premises. In 1992, the opening ceremony of the EWIC took place in the brand new auditorium, which I remember was inaugurated on this special occasion. The campus proved to be a friendly environment for me, offering many facilities and meeting opportunities. One of the most enviable features of the office where I had a desk in those years was its superb panorama, which included the university's School of Journalism. Not every academic visitor has a direct view over a brilliant white pyramid set off by the ocean in the background. Although my main contacts were in the Faculty of Psychology, I became aware of other facets of the university that contribute to its acclaim. One is the Institute of Astronomy. The Observatory of Isania is very well known, quite familiar to my French colleagues specializing in this field. Next June, the Teide Observatory's 30 years will be celebrated during the European Week of Astronomy. As regards psychology, I discovered that the departments of cognitive and social psychology and of developmental psychology were populated with outstanding scientists. Over the past decades, I have become familiar with a number of other Spanish universities, but there is no doubt that the ULL is one of the 4 or 5 top academic institutions meeting the highest standards in Spanish cognitive psychology. I was here in 2001 at the time of the university's third centenary, a truly notable occasion. In the years that followed, I was concerned by the consequences of the budget restrictions threatening Spanish universities, but was impressed by the quality of the effort being made, confirming the visibility and strength of the university in spite of these difficulties. The launching of the Campus Atlántico Tricontinental was a great initiative. The creation of the Neurocog Institute was also a significant event, whereby Manuel de Vega and his colleagues confirmed La Laguna's reputation for research in cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience on the international scene. I was proud to attend the inauguration of Neurocog, an event chaired by the rector of the university 3 years ago during my research visit of 2012. I would also like to mention that a good number of French colleagues have followed me in developing contacts with the ULL. These collaborations have resulted in research programs and grants, thus reinforcing the links between La Laguna and the French CNRS, as well as other academic hotspots in France, including the Sorbonne in Paris, the Behavior, Brain and Cognition Institute in Marseille, and the Neurocognition Lab in Grenoble. Even if my reasons for coming to Tenerife were primarily of an academic nature, it would have been impossible for me not to be captivated by the extraordinary and unique charm of the island. For a French person used to living and working in an urban environment, and I confess that I am a lover of the city of Paris, nevertheless, Tenerife offers a host of enticing features that made me fall in love with the island. The scenic landscapes, the presence of the Teide, the heart-stopping views that strike you wherever you drive or walk, the evidence of a telluric past, the friendly environment of the laurel forest, all of this has helped generate in me an extraordinary feeling that has made my working life here more exciting than in any other place I have ever been. Through the privilege of becoming a lagunero for 2 or 3 weeks per year, I have found the quietest place in the world to read, think, write, speak with friends, put together new ideas and make plans for future research. As a matter of fact, I am unable to count the number of articles, chapters, books I have written during my Tenerife time. In this sense, I am grateful to the ULL for having sped me forward in my work, and I very much value the ability of every corner of the island to refresh my mind during times of demanding writing. Actually, the hardest experience for me has always been to convey to my French friends and colleagues that Tenerife is a wonderful place to work. As psychologists, we are aware of the stereotypes present in the minds of our peers. When you tell colleagues that you are flying off to Tenerife, especially during the chilly month of February, they inevitably imagine you in a swimsuit lying around a swimming pool. I, of course, have taken great pains to correct the stereotype. I'm not the kind of guy who enthuses about beaches and swimming pools. Rather, my favorite spots include the remote places like Punta Teno, the Anaga Mountain, on the eastern tip of the island, which is ideal for refreshing one's mind before a couple of hours in front of a computer. And the cultural background of Tenerife, its history, music, and the friendly team at the Nivaria Hotel have also contributed to the inspiring atmosphere from which my work here has gained boundless advantage. Now, a psychologist who becomes acquainted with the island of Tenerife cannot help but spare at least a thought for Wolfgang Köhler, one of the most prominent figures of 20th century psychology. This was indeed the case for me when I became aware that the house where Köhler lived with his family during the First World War was still standing somewhere in the neighborhood of Puerto de la Cruz. I confess my thoughts were not simply perfunctory. I was really excited by the idea of actually visiting the very place where Köhler had conducted his famous experiments on the intelligence of apes. I am grateful to the colleagues of ULL who helped me find and visit the Casa Amarilla, as well as El Ciprés, the second house, along the old pathway that runs up to La Orotava. And I am more than grateful to a very special colleague and friend who provided me with generous amounts of information, having devoted years to reconstructing the details of Köhler's life on Tenerife. From his extensive investigation over many years, Ronald Lay from the State University of New York, Albany, has given us a superbly documented report on Köhler's life on Tenerife, then back in Germany, then in the United States. There is no doubt that Ronald deserves our recognition for the major work he has accomplished and the book he published in the year 1990. My visits to the Casa Amarilla each new year represent a recurring emotional moment for me. One of the most rewarding experiences of my life when I read Köhler's book was when I read Köhler's book on the mentality of apes, close to the Casa Amarilla, the very place where the book was written in 1914, 1 century ago. Of course, I was very excited about the plan of various people here in La Laguna and Puerto de la Cruz to preserve the house and fame of Köhler at this historic landmark, but sadly realized that such things are not easy to implement. Successive plans were developed and discussed, but faced endless administrative difficulties, with the result that the roof and the walls of the casa suffered extensively. At the time of my term as president of the International Union of Psychological Science, I modestly contributed to this effort by writing letters and making plans to please to various administrative and political bodies, but regrettably, there was little positive outcome. However, there now seems to be a glimmer of hope. Last year, which marked the centenary of the first year of Köhler on Tenerife, I was happy to learn that substantial, firmer plans were being drawn up, not only to restore the Casa Amarilla, but also to establish some research efforts in primatology in connection with his ambitious endeavor. This would certainly allow us to envisage a safe future for the house. Dear colleagues, let me conclude my presentation. Today's occasion, which touches me deeply and personally, should also be seen as a clear representation of our shared efforts to seek scientific knowledge in an international framework. We are in a period where human initiatives can no longer be implemented in isolation, especially in the domain of science. Not only are such enterprises increasingly international in nature, but in the academic world, they also include a strong collaborative and interdisciplinary component. This is not just a statement of principle on my part, as if interdisciplinarity was self-justified and beneficial to us by the sole virtue of being what it is. It is my belief that international and interdisciplinary initiatives are the best ways of generating thoughts and actions that truly and powerfully contribute to the advancement of human knowledge. So, permítanme concluir insistiendo en que la perspectiva de convertirme hoy en miembro de la comunidad académica de La Laguna es una oportunidad que me llena de genuino orgullo. Deseo en primer lugar expresar mi gratitud a todos aquellos que han apoyado y permitido que este proceso se haya desarrollado con éxito. Primariamente, Dr. Eduardo Domenech, rector magnífico de la universidad, Dr. Antonio Rodríguez, jefe de gabinete del rector, Dr. Hipólito Marrero, vicerrectorado de calidad institucional e innovación educativa, Dr. José María Palazón, secretario general de la universidad. Pero también me gustaría hacer extensivo mi agradecimiento a los siguientes colegas y amigos que han proporcionado su apoyo de diversas maneras, muy especialmente a los profesores de la ULL, Manuel de Vega, María José Rodrigo, Alberto Domínguez, Carlos Álvarez, José Miguel Díaz, Emilio Sainz, Elena Gámez, and also otros procedentes de otros centros académicos, Manuel Carreras, Teresa Barro, José María Pero, Eliodoro Carpintero, Alicia Salvador, José Juan Cañas, Elizabeth Tubao, Francisco Javier Sánchez y José Melchor Hernández. Gracias a todos por el honor que me hacen y por la confianza depositada en mí al concederme este nombramiento en esta solemne ceremonia.